ASML might be one of the most important companies in the world, and up until now it was one of my biggest holdings, but I'm selling. Not because I think it's a bad business, it's actually incredible, but sometimes in investing even the best companies don't make the best stocks. And in this video I'll walk through what ASML does, why it's so important, the financials, and why I'm rotating out for now. Welcome to the channel, friends. In today's video I'm going to be covering ASML, and I'm going to be covering these 8 things over here. ASML is one of the most important companies when it comes to creation of semiconductor chips. It plays a vital role in one of the steps in the creation of these chips, and these chips are usually used by companies such as Nvidia, Taiwan Semiconductor, Intel. These are the main customers of ASML. When it comes to creating a semiconductor chip, there's a few steps that are involved. So the first step is it needs to be designed by an engineer, and this is where companies such as Nvidia, they design a chip and then they send it to these guys to process. Then comes the step of preparing the wafer. The wafer is just known as the chip before anything is done to it. So these are thin silicon discs. Then it's sprayed with something called photoresist. It's a light sensitive chemical which is added to the wafer. Then you've got something called lithography, which happens. This is UV light which prints the pattern onto the wafer. And then you've got something called etching and ion implant. This is after lithography, when unwanted material is then removed and atoms are fired into the chip to alter the electrical properties. Then we've got something called layering and repeating. So this is when we essentially bulk up the chip by adding layers to it, which then allows metal to be added for wiring. Then there's the testing and cutting. So the chip is cut into the size that's needed. And then you've got the packaging and the final testing before it is shipped off to the company such as Nvidia or Taiwan Semiconductor. Just to visualize that a bit, once the design is done, you've got your wafer. This is then sprayed with a light sensitive chemical. And then you've got lithography, which happens, so the UV light, which then designs the actual chip. You could see that over here it just looks like small squares on the square itself, but if you look into it even closer, you could see how fine the detail is within that. And that's where ASML comes in. ASML is in charge of this step, the lithography step, and this is what ASML does. ASML also plays a role in the layering and repeating, because any layers that you add to the chip, that also needs to undergo the lithography. Going onto ASML's website, when it comes to lithography, these are the products that they offer. So they've got something called EUV lithography, which stands for extreme ultraviolet lithography, and then you've got something called DUV lithography. The difference between the two is that the actual size of the UV light that's produced with extreme ultraviolet is much more fine. So ASML machines, they can achieve 13.5 nanometers with EUV lithography, whereas with DUV lithography it's much bigger, it's not as fine as the EUV. And with the semiconductor chips, the more fine the lithography is, the better the performance of that chip. They also sell refurbished systems, and they also do things like servicing where they do inspections and things like that, computer lithography, and they've got the customer service side of things. So these are the things that ASML offer, and you could see that all of their focus is in these two things over here. When it comes to the EUV and the DUV, I just wanted to show this example because when people say that, you know, you can achieve 13.5 nanometers and things like that, it's hard to visualize that. And to be honest, even this is very hard to visualize, but this, when I actually visualized it in this way, it blown my mind. Like a red blood cell, something in the human body, you can't see a single red blood cell from the human eye. You have to use like a microscope or something, and that's 8,000 nanometers. Then you've got bacteria, you've got viruses such as flu and HIV and COVID, and then you've got the lithography which ASML achieves, which is 13.5 nanometers. This should say 13.5, not 15. That was a mistake from my side. But it just goes to show that, you know, the actual precision and the size of these UV lights that ASML can achieve is smaller than viruses. And it's just really hard to visualize that because viruses are already so small, and to achieve something even finer than that, it requires a lot of work and research into doing so. And lately ASML has released some new machines called the high NA EUVs, and these can achieve even finer diameters of 9 nanometers, which is absolutely crazy. It's really hard to imagine something like this. But anyway, these are one of the machines that ASML has, and you could see the size of it is really big because a lot of technology needs to go into it to produce such fine wavelengths of UV light. And if you were to look through, you could see that, the light, it starts off big and it just gets deflected, and there's lots of things happen to produce a very fine light, which 13.5 nanometers. Each of these machines, they cost 200,000 euros each. These are not cheap. These are very, very expensive. And ASML, they only make around 50 of these machines every year. So it's a small number of machines that they produce, but it's a very large price that they charge for it. These machines, they take about 1.5 years to make, and the EUV has 13.5 nanometers light source, so this thing over here, and it took ASML over 20 years to develop this technology. It's not something that they just decided to make and, within 2 years it was there. It took 20 years to develop this. Right, now going into the fundamentals of the company, if we have a quick glance over here, you could see 3 important metrics when it comes to the stock. So you got ASML, and you've got the earnings per share, you got the sales, and then you got the shares outstanding. So when it comes to the earnings per share, the general trend is up, however recently is flat or even going down. When it comes to sales, they are making more every single year, but the last couple of years it has been a bit flat. And when it comes to shares outstanding, it is decreasing or flat in nature, so that's good because they're not diluting their shares, and when it comes to the sales, they are increasing their sales every single year, so that's good to see. The earnings per share, however, it's a bit hit and miss. That's the only thing. And if we dig deeper into some of the fundamentals, you can see it's got a market cap of $252 billion, so this is a very big company. They make 30 billion in revenue every single year. They've got an EV to sales ratio of 8.1. Their PE ratio is 29, and when it comes to revenue, over the last 5 years, they've increased their revenue by 20% each year. When it comes to return on invested capital, they have a return on invested capital of 23.6%, and they also pay a 1.1% dividend, which is really good to see. They have a PEG ratio of 1.3, which is less than 2, so it is undervalued in that sense, and they have net profit margins of 28%, which is really good to see. Digging deeper into the financials, I've got the free cash flow per share in dark blue over here, and this line over here is the EBITDA margin. So the EBITDA margin is generally in an uptrend or flat, and the free cash flow per share, it increased but it's been flat over the last couple of years. So in terms of the growth that ASML has seen, the free cash flow per share has not been increasing that much, and also the EBITDA margin is pretty stable at about 36%. If we then look at the price to operating cash flow, it is below the average of 33, and we're currently at 22 at the moment, but the lowest it's ever been is 12, but that's all the way in 2016. But if we look at the last 5 years, so let me just change this to 2020, the lowest ASML has ever been was in 2020, where the price to operating cash flow was about 15, and currently we're at 22. So ASML is below the average of 37, so it is undervalued in that sense. If we also look at the EV to sales ratio, the average that ASML has been is about 11, the lowest it's been is 6.79, and ASML currently is at 8, so it's much below the average, and it's not too far away from the lowest it's ever been, which was just last month actually. Going forwards, looking at the forward PE ratio, if I add the average and the lowest to this, the average forward PE ratio for ASML is 31, and we're currently below the average, so it's lower than its average. ASML is looking undervalued at the moment, and if we look at some of the estimates going forwards, at the end of 2025, we're expecting a 15% increase in revenues, and by the end of next year, we're expecting an 8% increase in revenues. And when we look at the earnings per share, end of this year, 22% increase, end of next year, 15% increase. And these numbers, over 30 analysts are looking at it, so it's quite reliable, these numbers. And if I go on the research tab, then ASML is valued at $960 by Morningstar, and they rate it as a 4-star company with a wide economic moat. So that all sounds good, but now let's talk about some of the risk associated with ASML. So the first risk is that ASML, they sell a low volume, high price product. 50 of these machines are made every single year, but they charge 200,000 euros for these products. So if this company fails to innovate, if they can't continue creating or improving on these machines, then customers, they'll start looking for alternatives. And the second risk that is mentioned by Morningstar is in regards to exports to China. At the moment, the US government, they've banned chip exports to China. And if this is to continue, then ASML's growth will suffer. And ASML, they don't really have any control over this because it's things that are implemented by Trump. Now if we go on revenue by regions, you can see that China over here in purple, they make up a big portion of their revenue of ASML. They make up $10 billion worth of revenue. So this is a lot that China makes up, and the predictions are that this is going to decrease because of the chip export bans, and that's definitely going to affect ASML's business because in recent years the exposure to China has been increasing since 2022, 2023, 2024. So this is going to slow down. That's one of the risks with ASML. And the other thing is the cyclical nature of the semiconductor industry. It adds to ASML's risk. Semiconductors, some years is up, some years is down. That's just the cyclical nature of semiconductors, whether that be AMD, whether that be ASML, whether that be Nvidia. Digging further into the risk, I'm going to ask FinChat to go through the transcripts and see what the further risks are. What are the risks with ASML? So the first thing from the transcripts is the geopolitical and macroeconomic risks. So you've got things like tariffs, the export bans to China, which we've already mentioned. We've got the competitive risks, which I'll mention just after this. And we've got the supply chain and operational risks. So any significant dip in orders or inability to scale production, it could impact ASML's ability to meet customer demand. And at the moment, the demand for these chips are just very high at the moment. With competition, when it comes to EUV, there is no competitor for ASML. ASML, they play a very important part in the patterning, the lithography side of things, and there are other companies listed over here such as Nikon, Canon, Tokyo Electron and other, but the problem with these is these are DUV lithographies, these are not EUVs. ASML is the only EUV lithography company in the world. So the moat that ASML has when it comes to competition is second to none. Like ASML, their moat is as strong as it gets. There's nothing that can top it. The only risk with that is there's reports that there's a Huawei linked firm reportedly developing lithography machines. So there's a company called Sea Carrier in China, and they've been developing their own lithography machines. At the moment, the smallest waveform that they've managed to achieve is 28 nanometers, which is more than double what ASML can do. ASML is 13.5 nanometers and their new machines is about 9 nanometers. So ASML, even against this, ASML is much more stronger in terms of what they've got. Their product, it took 20 years to develop to get to where they are, and even this company, Sea Carrier, they cannot match what ASML can do. So that's just one thing to be aware of. And recently, in 2024, ASML sold their first high-NA EUV machine which can achieve 9 nanometers, and this was for $400 million, is literally the size of a double-decker bus. So ASML, they're continuing to develop to make sure that they stay on top of the game. There's a whole long article on this high-NA lithography that ASML has created, and feel free to search it up and read up on it. But essentially, the main takeaway with this is that ASML, they've developed a new machine which is more expensive, but it can create 9 nanometers, which is absolutely crazy, which is smaller than the 13.5 that they had before this. So ASML, it sounds like a really good company, it's got a really wide moat, and there's a lot of things that it's doing right. So why exactly am I thinking of selling it? And the reason why is the technicals. So let's go into the technicals. Here is the chart of ASML, and since 2015, ASML has been in an uptrend, which is really good to see. But one of the things I like to do when it comes to seeing the stocks that I'm buying is I want to see if it's a bleeder or not. And what I mean by is it a bleeder is how is it performing compared to the S&P 500. So if I go on ASML divided by the S&P 500, this is how the chart looks. Since about 2021, it's been flat. It's been going down, up, and back down. So it's been trading in this range for the last 3 or 4 years. And at the moment, it's only just gone above this bull market support band in terms of price, where it's gone above these key moving averages. So if it does stay above this, then it is bullish for ASML. It might mean that it's doing another leg up. However, I'm not satisfied with how ASML has just been trading in a range for the last few years, and I'd prefer something which has been in an uptrend compared to something like a downtrend, which is what ASML has been since 2024. So just looking at some of the other stocks within the semiconductor space, I wanted to see how ASML has performed compared to some of the other semis such as Nvidia or Broadcom. And so I just searched ASML and I divided by Nvidia, and you could see the trend over here. Since 2013, ASML has been in a downtrend and is at all-time lows against Nvidia. And what that essentially means, the way to interpret these graphs is if something is in a downtrend, when it comes to ASML divided by NVIDIA, that means ASML is underperforming NVIDIA. When something is in an uptrend against NVIDIA, that means this stock is outperforming NVIDIA, is doing better than what NVIDIA is doing. And when something is flat, then that means it's performing the same, exactly the same as the other stock. So ASML would be performing exactly the same as NVIDIA. So in this range over here, it was more or less performing the same as NVIDIA, but now it's just been in a clear downtrend. It's still below the bull market support band over here. So when it comes to comparing ASML versus NVIDIA solely on a technical basis, then you're better off investing in NVIDIA than you are with ASML. Then I wanted to compare the same thing with Broadcom. So rather than NVIDIA, let's compare to Broadcom. And we could see over here, it's pretty much the same chart. Like it's in a downtrend, it's below the bull market support band, and it's pretty much at all-time lows. So compared to ASML and Broadcom, you're much better off investing in Broadcom than you are with ASML. So although they're all part of the semiconductor industry, but different parts of semiconductor, so ASML is in charge of a key component when it comes to creating semiconductor chips, and whereas NVIDIA is more the high-flying side of things where they actually design it and then they just sell it. That's the main reason why. And I just wanted to finish off by just visually illustrating that on here as well. So if I add NVIDIA, and if I also add Broadcom, and if I full screen this, you could see that over the last 5 years, ASML, it has gone up 134%, which is really good. But if you had invested in Broadcom, you'd be up 800%. And if you had invested in NVIDIA, then it would have been 1400%. So the difference is very stark over here. Even if I look at the last 3 years, again, the winner here is NVIDIA, the loser here is ASML. If I look at the 1 year, then again, same story. If I look at year to date, then it's more or less the same, but again, Broadcom is the winner over here, then it's NVIDIA, and then it's ASML. So in conclusion, you could see over here that ASML is the second biggest stock in my portfolio. The first biggest being Adobe, but this is the second biggest on my portfolio, and I am currently more or less flat. I'm down 3%. I think that's mainly because of FX fees. Yeah, so 4% in FX fees. I've got a position of almost £5,000 in it. I'm not selling today, number one, because the markets are closed, and number two, I just want to see how it does over the next week. And although the fundamentals of ASML is amazing, ASML is an amazing company, it's got a wide moat. I can't think of any other company that can touch what ASML is doing. So it's a very, very important company. However, when it comes to investing, we're here to make money. And with ASML, if it has a track record of underperforming other stocks within the sector, such as NVIDIA, Broadcom, the S&P 500, then I think it's more important to maybe reduce the size of the position I've got in ASML and maybe diversify by putting more money into NVIDIA and Broadcom. So that way I have one less stock to keep tracking. Companies such as NVIDIA and Broadcom, it has that track record in terms of the technicals, it's above the key moving averages, and it has that track record in terms of performing against the rest of the market. I think that's what I'm going to do. Please like and subscribe, and I'd love to hear what you think in terms of my decision, in terms of what I am doing with ASML. I'd like to hear below, so feel free to comment below. Thank you.